I'd like to bring on Bob Bianchi to discuss this, host of Law and Crime Network and former head New Jersey County Prosecutor. Bob, thanks for being with us. It's great to have you back.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So, Bob, is this a gun problem or is this a criminal problem? I mean, Krasner is right. You can go to neighboring states and find much more restrictive gun laws, but to my knowledge, those laws haven't really made things any less violent in those states. Bob, what's your takeaway here?
Yeah, well, since the state of New Jersey, the great state of New Jersey, was invoked here by the district attorney, I will say, I mean, there's no question about the fact that we combated this situation when I was the county prosecutor, particularly when it related to gangs and people that were committing drug crimes, that they were bypassing the strictness, if you will, of the New Jersey gun laws and going into Pennsylvania and getting a lot of the weapons there. I mean, there's no question about the fact that those weapons were traced to states that had lesser and less restrictive gun laws than we had in the state of New Jersey. You know, I'm not a person that could talk to you about the statistics or the rightness or wrongness and what regulations there should be and shouldn't be as a lawyer, as a legal analyst, but I will say one thing. One thing that kind of disturbs me a little bit is that this debate, I think, is a fair debate to have. I think it's a fair debate to have. Reasonableness can come in many different forms, either to the left or to the right, depending on how you view it. What concerns me about this case is I'm just putting myself in the shoes of this district attorney when I was the district attorney, and I cannot imagine having press conferences like this. I have to be honest with you. I'm getting very, very concerned, and this is an equal opportunity offender on the left and the right, Democrat and Republican. We were sworn into office, and I was, again, you'll hear me say this all the time, I was appointed in New Jersey, that's how it's done, by the governor to that position. In other states where there are elected officials, again, Democrats and Republicans, what I'm seeing more and more is using tragedies, using situations like this to make political statements because they come up through a political system because they're elected by the citizens. Regardless of your party affiliation, I just think that this is endemic of a bad problem where prosecutors on both sides are catering to the court of public opinion as opposed to just the facts and the law. Your job as a prosecutor, you can make recommendations for policy, you can speak to legislators, but you don't want to be using your press conference time to be talking about, you know, in my opinion, things of this nature that are better served outside of the trauma of what's occurring at this particular time with this particular case. So again, what we're doing now is just watching a tennis match as I see it. On the right, you know, something happens and they lob it over to the left, and the left gets it and they don't like it and they lob it over to the right. And in the middle, the justice system is being torn apart because our job is to prosecute people, convict them, and put them in jail for horrendous things like this. So I'm not saying you can't do both of them, Alison. I'm just saying that we're getting to a point right now where it's becoming so politicized that the message is just being lost. Any valid message that you may have is getting lost, and people are just entrenching deeper and deeper into the divide on the extremes of both sides, and therefore reasonableness will never, in my opinion, in this political environment occur. And things like this, and again, I emphasize, Republicans do it too, just further exacerbate that chasm.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's definitely not the time or place, and it, I think in this case, was definitely uncalled for. But he didn't stop there, is the problem I have. I have another video of Krasner when asked about the gun laws in Philadelphia. Let's take a listen to what else he had to say.
We have to keep fighting, but it is time for this legislature and, frankly, legislators across the country to swear off their addiction to NRA money and to swear off their addiction to this gun fetish that is really only shared by a moderate quantity of the U.S. population. Most Americans want reasonable gun regulation, just like they want reasonable car regulation, and they accept reasonable car regulation. It's time for people who are running for office to swear off NRA money, to swear off gun lobby money, to swear off this absurd interpretation of the Second Amendment that has been put out there by militias, much of it untrue. And frankly, it's time for the Supreme Court to cut it out. This should not be a country of guns. It should be a country of people, living people.
Bob, my question is, couldn't a lot of this violent crime and many of these issues surfacing be resolved if the DA himself focused more on enforcing existing laws by charging criminals for their criminal acts and focusing less on creating these new laws?
Wow. That's a deep question. Okay. Look, when I was I can't account. I'm not watching this guy. I can tell you that I was considered the hardest prosecutor anybody had ever seen at one point, and then some people called me the most extreme liberal prosecutor. And what they were really seeing was that they're not really evaluating what the office is doing. With the 10% of the people that need to be locked away for as humanly long as possible, I was very hard on them. For a lot of the other people that were mentally ill or addicted, I tried to create environments where to make sure that the community was protected. By the same token, we could try to rehabilitate those individuals because they did not represent a continuing danger to the community. So when we get into comparisons as to, who's easy, who's not easy, I will say this. My mantra is always the same. You don't have safe communities, you don't have businesses. You don't have businesses, you don't have economic opportunity. You don't have educational opportunity. You have to keep the streets safe. So I don't know this guy's track record. I don't, so I can't comment on it. But if the idea of criminal justice reform is that you let violent offenders back onto the street to commit crimes, you are victimizing the people in those communities first and foremost, those individuals who are hardworking, decent people who want their kids to be able to walk to school without being accosted by drug dealers and gang members. You're not doing them any favor. And then the whole rot in the system falls apart when the businesses go. It just creates a cancerous environment. So I won't speak as to this gentleman's record. I don't know it well enough to do it. But I do know that some that are on the more liberal side of the equation, and I probably consider myself the moderate to conservative, felt like bail reform. We'll just let everybody out without a recognition of whether they represented a danger to the community or not. And I think we're seeing that policies like that are not good. But by the same token, Alison, to be fair, and again, we're going to come down to that moderate reasonableness standard. It also wasn't fair that, for example, in the bail scenario, and I witnessed this, where people can't make a $200 bail and are sitting in jail for 3 years, that even if they were convicted, they'd serve less time than the time they spent in jail waiting for a trial. So like everything else, what I've noticed is so different from when I was the prosecutor is that even the people that were in different parties in my county, they recognized the need for law enforcement. And when they had a problem, they'd come in and try to make reasonable accommodations. Typically speaking, when both people held their nose when they walked out of the room from both sides of a particular issue, you knew you were probably hitting the right stride. But again, I go back to it. Can we get there in today's political environment? That political environment is killing us from a law enforcement point of view, from a justice point of view, from a respect of our institutions point of view. And all I can say is I am glad I'm not a government official today.
It would certainly be tough these days. I totally agree, Bob. Well, before I let you go, I have one other story I got to get your take on. Lab tests just confirmed the white powdery substance that was found in the West Wing of the White House is indeed cocaine. I gotta know, do you think Hunter was there over the holiday weekend? But more importantly, what's going on here, Bob? Do you think there will be any legal consequences for whoever it was possessing cocaine within the White House premises?
So, Alison, let's drill this story down because it's really interesting. Like, I'm just trying to find one thing that was notable to me. Where were the drugs found? Okay, because I watch, and it's really, again, we're going back to that same thing. The disinformation, the misinformation. Sources say there were people that literally had it in the Oval Office. It turns out that it's in an area where it's traversed by employees and visitors and heavily trafficked, and probably was in a cubicle where people put their cell phones and things that they're not allowed to take when they're going on tour. So this is an area that's open to the public. It's in a vestibule area. It could be, listen, anybody. They found it Sunday. It really depends what I'd be doing as a prosecutor, saying when was the last time the area where the drugs were found was swept, so that we have a beginning date where we know that there was nothing there, and we know that we found it on Sunday. There are going to be visitor logs there, from what I understand, because you can't get into that entrance, even though it's a public entrance, without signing in. So they're going to narrow down the window. And look, I mean, this could be anybody, and I hate to disabuse people of this because I know people like to make good of a fun story, especially when it's against your foe. But I can assure you, Alison, there are people that have been visitors at the White House that have brought cocaine and other drugs in and out that had for personal use for decades now. And to answer your last kind of, well, not question, but your kind of quip, from what I do understand, the president and his family, including Hunter, were all many, many, many miles away when it was found. So, let's wait and see, because I just think it's probably going to be one of those things where it's just an ordinary citizen that came in, probably didn't realize that they were going to have to empty their pockets, put all their stuff in a locker in a cubby, pulled it all out. Although it is a little unusual that somebody would leave without their drugs, because we know one thing, why leave your dime bag when you don't have to?
Great point. Well, Bob, thank you so much for clearing all of that up for us. We appreciate it, and it'll certainly be interesting to see how that one pans out. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.